This is Law of Attraction Explored. I'm Tim Grimes. Some of you are probably wondering about my coaching, so I thought I would just take a minute to explain what it is that I offer. What I do with people is get real deep. And what do I mean by we get deep? Well, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know exactly what I mean when I say that. The kind of coaching that I offer is meant to transform your life. And I feel very confident that it will transform your life and that you'll enjoy doing it. And if you don't, to be frank, you don't have to pay me. I like working with people who want to go deep, people who are willing to explore what's going on the inside and realize that there's nothing wrong with them and that what is going on the inside is actually good. And dare we say it, what's going on the inside is actually God. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can always email me at info@radicalcounselor.com, or you can just go to my website, radicalcounselor.com. And I hope you enjoyed the episode. So I just wanted to kind of circle back a little bit and mention something that I've spoken about before in this podcast, and I've also touched upon in The Joy of Not Thinking and The Wild Calm, and actually most completely in my video series that I did a long time ago called Stop Being Serious. This is going to be a short episode. I've recently recorded a seminar, and I'm going to be posting clips of that on YouTube over the coming days. So be sure to check out my YouTube channel if you want to see a lot of new content. But what I wanted to talk about today is something that, like I said, I like to mention on occasion because it easily can be passed over. This podcast tends to be kind of mellow, kind of meditative. And really, my approach to the law of attraction and to self-improvement in general and to spirituality in my life in general is not just mellow and meditative. I'm very much into being active. And, we've been talking about taking action a lot in this podcast recently, how it's important not just to kind of be passive, but to take action. And to take action can mean to take physical action. I actually discussed this in the Law of Attraction Simplified, when I'm talking about moving. Moving can be a mental, internal process when you're using your imagination, like we've been discussing recently. But it can also be a physical process, And one thing that I notice in my own life and that I notice when I talk to people is that we forget about movement. And then we forget that it's okay to be quiet and meditative, and it's also okay to be really active. And one is not contradicting the other. I remember, to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I remember when I was a real estate agent and I used to rent apartments. And, there were some clients that you had to speak with in very measured, quiet tones, almost meditative tones, just because that was the appropriate way to speak to them. It was how to best serve them. And there were other clients that wanted more energy. And there were some clients that were not good clients, and you basically needed to show the door. And I remember one particular instance where, I had a few clients in the morning, and there was this one very difficult client who was coming back to see me again. And so I had a client in the morning before this difficult client, and it was a very, mellow interaction. I think we signed a lease or something like that. It was just very relaxed. And, my colleague was there and saw this. And then this difficult person came in who I'd already been interacting with considerably, more than I usually interact with a client, meaning that they'd already come in multiple times. And to make a long story short, I basically told them off, yelled at them in the office, and, showed them the door. And my colleague was just like, I don't understand how you can go from being so calm with clients to yelling, almost screaming at a client. And I was basically like, well, that was the appropriate thing to do in that situation. Now, I'm not saying that, looking back at that, I'm not saying I would do the same thing necessarily today. I don't think I would. First of all, I wouldn't be a real estate agent. But secondly, I wouldn't necessarily yell at the client the way I did. But at that time, I definitely understand why I took that action, why I was so loud. Likewise, I understand why I was so mellow with my first client, and in general was mellow with most of my clients compared to most people who are real estate agents. It's about being comfortable with these different parts of your personality and your energy levels. And I mentioned IFS, in a recent episode, internal family systems. And what Richard Schwartz talks about a lot is how we have different parts. And all of these parts that can seem kind of troubling and, make us be like, why is this coming up? Why do I feel anxious? Why do I feel irritated? Why do I feel scared? These parts are there for a reason. And believe it or not, if we look at them and investigate them and, try to actually work with them, we realize that they're there to help us. And it's just that they're taking on a load that we don't need them to take on anymore, but that was important for them to take on when we were younger. And again, this is kind of how we can look at energy and these, and sometimes being kind of low key and sometimes being very high energy and, most of the time perhaps just being kind of in between. In Stop Being Serious, I call this our emotional spectrum. And I give the example of going, between 0 and 60 miles an hour. When sometimes we're going to be on a road and we have to pull over. And then we're going 0 miles an hour. And sometimes we're going to be driving really slowly because perhaps, it's dark and, we have to drive with our headlights on and just be very careful and drive very slowly. And sometimes we have to drive quickly. We have to drive 60 on a side road where, it would seem like we usually would be only driving 40. But we have to drive 60 because we have to get somewhere quickly, or it's important to go quickly to get somewhere. But most of the time, usually, we're going to be driving, between 20 and 40 miles an hour on like a side road. Not talking about the highway here in this metaphor. And the point is just to be comfortable doing all those things. Be comfortable not only being meditative when it comes to these law of attraction principles and these spiritual principles and ideas, but also be comfortable getting really loud and active. To give you another example, more current, in the morning, I often get up and, I kind of like vibe out in bed and do exercises kind of like we were just discussing in terms of imaginative exercises that Maltz talks about. The theater of the mind, as Matt Fury calls it. But it's this very meditative, relaxed, imaginative type of meditation. And then, 20 minutes later, half an hour later, 45 minutes later, my daughter might wake up and join my wife and I in bed. And before I know it, I'm making loud farting noises with her, and just speaking gibberish loudly. And my wife is telling both of us to quiet down or go into the other room. So that's going from 0, being very still, up to 60 really quickly. And we're all doing this in our life. And it's really more like, well, do I feel comfortable doing this, or does this make me feel uncomfortable? Does this make me feel like I'm being somehow a bad person by being too energetic, too loud? Or am I a bad person because I'm too sedate? Or am I a bad person because I'm, working on a paper or interacting in a very, steady 30-mile-an-hour range for, most of my day? And the answer is no, none of those things are bad if you're comfortable doing them. Our energy levels are going to fluctuate. And there's different parts of us that are going to, show up that are just going to be there some of the time. And are we comfortable with those parts being there, or are we uncomfortable? The more comfortable we become with these different parts of us, these different energetic levels of us, the better we feel, generally speaking. So, this again kind of seems just like common sense when I say it, but it's more about applying it in our life and just paying attention to it and becoming more comfortable with who we are. As I said, there's several new YouTube clips that are going to be going up in the coming days from this recent seminar. I think you'll find them helpful. And until next time, enjoy.